The guests were still cheering when I realized I couldn't breathe. The music swelled, champagne spilled, and laughter echoed off the marble walls. But inside, everything was silent. My chest felt hollow, my hands cold. I just said, "I do," to a woman I didn't love, while the one person I truly did was standing in the crowd, watching me with eyes that looked like they were bleeding. That person was Blake, my bride's younger brother. Started 3 years ago. Back then, I was just another guy trying to rebuild his life after a messy breakup. I met Olivia, Blake's sister, at a charity gala. She was everything people dream of marrying. Kind, elegant, beautiful in a quiet, classic way. When she laughed, people leaned in closer. When she walked into a room, everything seemed to settle around her. Everyone told me she was the one. But what they didn't know was that her brother Blake was the first person who made me feel seen again. Blake was sunlight in sneakers. He had that kind of energy that made every room brighter. The type of person who danced without music, who said things like, "Life's too short to live halfway." He was studying film, chasing stories no one else dared to tell. When we met, I thought he was just a kid. Olivia's younger brother, 5 years younger than me, full of big dreams and impossible optimism. But then he smiled, and for some reason I couldn't look away. We started spending time together, at first innocently. Late-night conversations after Olivia went to bed. Morning jogs that turned into coffee dates. I told myself I was being a good friend, a future brother-in-law who cared. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. It was never that. I remember the first time he touched my hand. We were sitting on the hood of my car, parked near the lake behind their family's house. He was telling me about his favorite movie, Call Me by Your Name, and laughing about how no one in his small town would ever understand it. His laughter faded, and for a moment, there was silence. Then he said quietly, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" When I didn't answer, he reached over and touched my hand, just barely. But the warmth of that single touch burned through me like lightning. That night, I didn't sleep. After that, everything changed. We tried to ignore it at first, pretend that the air between us wasn't charged, that my heart didn't race every time his shoulder brushed mine. But the more I tried to fight it, the more it pulled me in. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified of falling, and realizing I already had. There was a night months before the wedding when we almost told her. Olivia had gone on a work trip to Chicago, and Blake came to visit me in the city. He brought takeout, a bottle of cheap wine, and that same reckless grin that could make me forget everything I was supposed to be. We stayed up until 3 a.m. watching an old movie. The city was quiet, and he was lying next to me on the couch, his head on my shoulder. Then he looked up at me, and I swear, the world stopped. I didn't mean to kiss him, but I did. And once I did, there was no going back. It wasn't a passionate, movie-like kiss. It was soft, trembling, scared. The kind of kiss that asks a question instead of giving an answer. He pulled back first, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. The guilt came next. It always does. I told myself to end it, to forget it, to choose the safe path. Olivia loved me. She deserved happiness. I told myself I did the right thing when I proposed to her months later. But when Blake hugged me at our engagement party and whispered, "I just want you to be happy," I realized he was lying, and so was I. Because happiness wasn't in that room. It was standing in front of me, trying not to cry. The wedding day came like a dream I couldn't wake from. Every detail was perfect. The flowers, the music, the smiles. Everyone called us the perfect couple. But when Olivia walked down the aisle, I saw Blake standing behind her, holding her bouquet. Our eyes met for half a second. That half second destroyed me. I said my vows. I kissed her. The guests clapped. But as the music played and the confetti fell, my heart was somewhere else, standing at the edge of the crowd, trying not to break apart. After the ceremony, I couldn't stay inside. I walked out, still wearing my suit, the vows still echoing in my head. The sunset painted the lake gold, the same lake where Blake had first touched my hand years ago. And there he was. He stood alone by the water, jacket off, tie undone, eyes red. He didn't turn around when he said, "I knew you'd come." I didn't say anything. For a long time we just stood there, two people caught between what they wanted and what the world demanded. Finally I said, "I can't do this." He turned then, and his face was wet. Not from the lake, not from the rain, but from tears. "Then don't." I took a step closer. Then another. I could smell his cologne, the one I used to tease him for wearing too much of. His lips trembled. "Aiden," he whispered. "If you stay, you'll hate yourself. If you leave, they'll hate you. So the question is, who do you want to live for?" His words hit me like a knife. I looked at the water, at the reflection of the sky, at the ring on my finger, and for the first time in my life I stopped thinking. I reached for his hand. He flinched but didn't pull away. And then, without another word, I leaned in and kissed him, not out of guilt or fear or confusion, but because I couldn't live another day pretending I didn't love him. When we broke apart, he looked at me like he was seeing the end of the world. "You just got married," he said, voice cracking. "I know," I whispered, "and I can't go back in there." Blake stared at me for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, "Then come with me." And I did. We didn't plan it. We didn't pack bags or make promises. We just drove. Past the city, past the lights, past everything I thought my life was supposed to be. The radio played some old song about freedom, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. But freedom has a price. By the time the sun rose, my phone had over 50 missed calls. Olivia, my parents, her family, my best friend. Every message started with disbelief and ended with anger. I didn't answer any of them. Blake reached over and turned my phone off. "Don't look back," he said softly. But how do you not look back when the person you hurt is someone who never deserved it? I stared out the window, guilt eating at me like acid. "She didn't deserve this," I said. "No," Blake replied, "but neither did you." I turned to him. "What if we ruined everything?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe everything needed to be ruined before we could start again." The car fell silent after that. The road stretched endlessly ahead, lined with trees, glowing in the early light. For a moment, I let myself believe we could really start over. That love, our love, could survive the wreckage we left behind. And maybe it could. But I knew one thing for certain: the world would never forgive us. Yet as Blake rested his head against the window, his hands still in mine, I realized, maybe forgiveness wasn't what we needed. Maybe all we needed was each other. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves instead of vows. The motel we stopped at was small, forgotten. Paint peeling from the walls, curtains too thin to block the rising sun. Blake was sitting by the window, knees pulled to his chest, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. He looked tired but calm, like someone who'd already made peace with the storm. When he saw me stir, he smiled faintly. "You snore," he said. I laughed quietly, rubbing my face. "I do not." "You do," he said, sipping his coffee. "You sounded like a truck reversing all night." That was Blake, always finding light in the dark, even when everything around us was chaos. But that morning, beneath the teasing tone, there was something else: fear. "Are you okay?" I asked. He turned to the window. "I keep thinking about her. About Olivia." I sat up slowly. The name hit like a bruise I hadn't healed yet. "Me too." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside was waking. Seagulls crying, wind brushing against the thin glass. The air smelled of salt and coffee and regret. Finally, he said softly, "Do you think she'll ever forgive you?" I thought about Olivia's face, her smile, her trust, the way she looked at me when I promised her forever. "No," I said, "and I don't think she should." Blake's fingers tightened around his mug. "And me? Will you forgive me?" I looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were red from sleeplessness, his jaw clenched, his shirt wrinkled from the long drive. He looked nothing like the carefree boy I first met. He looked like a man who'd broken his own heart to follow it. "There's nothing to forgive," I said quietly. But we both knew that wasn't true. We stayed at that motel for 3 days. It was like living in limbo, suspended between who we were and who we might become. We cooked noodles on a portable stove, played old songs from his phone, and talked about everything except the wedding. At night, we lay in silence. Sometimes we held hands. Sometimes we didn't. On the third night, Blake asked, "What happens now?" I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. When I looked at my reflection in the mirror, no tux, no crowd, no pretense. I saw a man who had finally told the truth, even if it destroyed everything else. But Blake needed more than that. He needed a future. "Let's go somewhere no one knows us," he said suddenly, eyes lighting up. "California, or maybe Oregon. You can start over. We can start over." The word we hung in the air like fragile glass. "I left everything behind," I reminded him. "My job, my family, my home." He smiled. "Then let's build a new one." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But part of me still lived in the church, still heard the echo of vows I'd broken, still saw Olivia's face when she realized I was gone. That night, I stepped outside while Blake slept. The ocean was endless, black and alive. I stood there barefoot, the cold waves biting at my feet. Somewhere out there, people were already talking, gossip spreading, headlines brewing. Runaway groom leaves bride at the altar. They'd call me cruel, a coward, a liar, and maybe they'd be right. But none of them had seen the way Blake looked at me that night by the lake. None of them knew what it meant to love someone who society said you shouldn't. I came back inside, and for a long time I just watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling slowly, his hand half curled on the blanket. That's when I realized, love doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like survival. The next morning, we left the coast. We drove west, following the sunrise, no destination in mind. I sold my watch for gas money. Blake drew maps on napkins marking towns we might pass through. The world blurred by gas stations, diners, motels, endless road. For the first time in years, there was no plan, just movement. Sometimes we talked about small things, movies, music, the way coffee tastes different in every town. Other times, we didn't speak for hours. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken forgiveness, quiet understanding. One evening, we stopped at a rest area overlooking a field of golden grass. The sun was setting, painting the world in fire. Blake leaned against the hood of the car, hair glowing in the light. He looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about what this means? About what people will say?" I nodded. "Every day." He smiled sadly. "And you'd still choose me?" "Yes," I said. "Every time." He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "You shouldn't." I frowned. "Why not?" "Because I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." I took a step closer. "Blake, I didn't lose everything. I just found what really matters." He closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "You're going to make me believe in happy endings again." I brushed his tear away. "Then maybe that's what we're doing, writing our own." That night, we found a small cabin by a forest, rented by an old couple who didn't ask questions. The air smelled of pine and rain. We built a fire, cooked kin soup, and watched the flames dance. At one point, Blake whispered, "Do you ever think we'll stop running?" "Maybe one day," I said. He nodded slowly. "And when that day comes, promise me you won't look back." I reached over and pulled him close. "I won't," I said. "Not as long as you're next to me." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, steady, endless. Inside, for the first time since the wedding, I felt peace. Not because the world had forgiven us, but because, somehow, we had started to forgive ourselves. The next morning, Blake woke me with a smile. "You know what day it is?" I shook my head. Our first day of freedom. He opened the window, letting the cold air rush in, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, fearless, bright, alive, the one who believed love could change the world. I thought about all we had lost, family, friends, stability. But when he turned toward me, eyes full of sunlight, I knew I hadn't made a mistake. Maybe love wasn't about being understood. Maybe it was about being brave enough to be misunderstood, together. And as he laughed, as the wind carried his voice through the trees, I whispered silently to myself, I'd do it all again. We stayed in that cabin for almost a month. It wasn't part of the plan, not that we ever had one, but something about that place made time slow down. Mornings began with coffee and quiet, the sound of rain dripping from pine branches outside. Afternoons were spent walking through the woods, our fingers brushing occasionally, both of us pretending it was by accident. Nights were long, full of stories, laughter, and silence thick enough to swallow us whole. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and just watch him. The firelight would flicker across his face, softening his edges, making him look impossibly young. In those moments, I felt both lucky and terrified. Lucky to have found him, terrified that life might take him away. Blake had always been the dreamer between us. He talked about moving to California, starting fresh, maybe opening a little coffee shop near the beach. He'd tell me about the smell of salt in the air, the laughter of strangers passing by, and how we'd hang fairy lights on the porch and play old vinyl records at night. Wouldn't that be something? He'd say, eyes shining. And I'd nod, pretending it wasn't impossible. But reality has a way of finding you no matter how far you run. One morning, I went into town to get groceries. When I came back, I saw Blake sitting on the porch with a folded newspaper in his hands. His face was pale, lips pressed tight. He looked up when he heard me. They found out, he said quietly. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He handed me the paper. Right there, on the front page of some gossip site, was a photo of me and Olivia at the wedding, followed by another one, blurry but recognizable, of me and Blake getting into the car that night. The headline read, Runaway groom and bride's brother missing. Family in shock. I felt the world tilt. They know, Blake whispered. Everyone knows. I sat down next to him, unable to speak. The air around us felt heavier, like even the trees were listening. He broke the silence first. They'll think you're sick, or confused. They'll blame you. I shook my head. No, they'll blame you. He laughed bitterly. Yeah, probably. That's how it always goes, right? The younger one, the reckless one, the mistake. I reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. His eyes were glassy. Maybe this was a mistake. The words hit harder than I expected. Don't say that, I said quietly. He looked at me, really looked, and I saw the fear behind his anger. Aiden, I love you, but I can't be the reason your life falls apart. My life already fell apart, I said. You're the only part that makes sense. He turned away, shoulders trembling. Then what are we supposed to do now? I didn't have an answer. We didn't talk for the rest of the day. He stayed outside, staring at the trees while I sat inside, staring at the walls. The silence between us felt louder than any fight could have. That night I couldn't sleep. I got up, stepped outside, and found him sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket. The moonlight made his skin look silver. Without a word, I sat beside him. He finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Do you regret it? I took a deep breath. No. Do you? He hesitated, then shook his head. No, but I'm scared. Of what? Of what happens when the world catches up to us. I reached out, brushed my fingers through his hair. Then we'll face it together. He looked at me for a long moment, then leaned in and kissed me. Slow, desperate, like it might be the last time. When we pulled apart, he whispered, You always say that like it's easy. It's not, I said. It's just worth it. After that, something shifted between us. The tension broke, replaced by something quieter, deeper acceptance. We couldn't hide forever. So we made a choice. The next morning, we packed the car. We didn't know where we were going, only that we had to move forward. Blake folded the newspaper and left it on the porch, like a parting gift for the ghosts we were leaving behind. The drive was long. Miles turned into hours, hours into days. Somewhere between state lines, we stopped checking our phones altogether. The world could talk. We were done listening. We stopped in a small coastal town called Mendel Bay. It was quiet, tucked between cliffs and ocean, the kind of place where no one asked questions. We found a small apartment above a bakery, cheap and half-furnished, with peeling wallpaper and a window that looked out at the sea. Blake loved it instantly. "It's perfect," he said, twirling around the empty room. "It's ugly, but it's ours." We built a life out of small things. Mornings at the beach, afternoons painting the walls, evenings watching the sunset from the window, shoulders touching. We worked odd jobs. I found one at a hardware store, he took photos for tourists, and slowly the world began to fade into something distant, like an old dream we'd finally outgrown. One night, we sat on the floor eating noodles from plastic bowls when he said, "Do you ever think about her?" "Every day," I said honestly. He nodded. "Me too. She didn't deserve what happened," I said quietly. He put down his bowl, looked at me, and said something I never forgot. "Maybe love isn't about deserving. Maybe it's about surviving what it does to you." I reached for his hand, and he let me take it. We didn't need to say anything else. Over time, the noise faded. The headlines disappeared, replaced by newer scandals. People stopped calling. Life went on, not perfectly but peacefully. And somehow we did too. One evening, nearly 6 months later, we were walking along the beach when Blake stopped suddenly and said, "Look!" A pod of dolphins was leaping in the distance, their silhouettes cutting through the setting sun. The sky burned orange and pink, the same colors as the day we ran away. Blake smiled, his hair blowing in the wind. "You think they ever regret jumping?" I laughed softly. "Only when they hit the water." He grinned. "Then I guess we'll just keep swimming." We stood there for a long time watching the horizon. The past was still there, behind us, full of mistakes and heartbreak and unanswered questions. But for the first time, it didn't feel like it owned us. I looked at Blake, the boy who had ruined and rebuilt my life all at once, and whispered, "You were right." He turned to me. "About what?" "About starting over." He smiled, eyes glistening with light. "Took you long enough to believe it." We kissed then, the ocean roaring around us, the sun sinking into the waves. And for the first time I realized, maybe we didn't run away from love. Maybe we ran toward it.